The dawn was just a faint bruise of gold over the craggy peaks when Torin reached the farmstead. His bare feet, calloused and broad as plow blades, thudded softly on the packed earth of the winding trail to the homestead's gate. Dust swirled around his patched trousers, the cuffs frayed and barely reaching his shins. His shirt, stitched from old grain sacks, billowed in the breeze, too small for his towering frame but all he had. At 15 feet tall, Torin seemed to dwarf the sprawling fields of Thornridge Hollow, yet he moved with a careful grace, as if afraid to break the world beneath him. He paused at the gate, his massive hand hovering, then knocked gently on the wooden post. 2 slow thumps, not loud, not pleading, just a question cast into the morning quiet. A shadow stirred behind the weathered door of the farmhouse. It creaked open a fraction, revealing a woman's face, half lit by the rising sun, half hidden in the gloom. Her eyes were sharp, weathered, like stones polished by a hard river. "What's your business?" she asked, voice low and guarded. Torin ducked his head, his shaggy hair falling over eyes that held no challenge. "Heard you need a hand," he rumbled, his voice deep as distant thunder. "I can work." The woman's gaze flicked up, then up again, taking in his enormity. She didn't flinch, but her hand tightened on the doorframe. "Name?" "Torin," he said. "I'm 16. Don't need much. A corner to sleep in, some food if you've got it to spare." "Who told you I needed help?" "Old woman at the market in Low Crossing. Said your fences are down, your help's gone." The woman's lips pressed thin, just for a moment. Then she pushed the door wider. The farmstead sprawled behind her, its barns sagging, its fields patchy but stubborn, like it had weathered too many storms to care about appearances. "You ever worked a farm?" she asked. "Some," Torin said. "I learn quick." She studied him, her eyes lingering on his hands, each big enough to cradle a calf. Behind her, 2 boys appeared in the doorway. The older one, maybe 12, stood with his arms crossed, sizing Torin up like he was a storm cloud. The younger, about 7, clutched a carved wooden horse, its paint chipped, as if it could shield him. "My sons," the woman said, not turning. "Finn and Milo." Torin dipped his head. "Sirs," he said, the words soft but earnest, though both boys looked too small for it. The woman stepped aside. "One day," she said. "You work, Huey. Then we'll talk." Torin ducked low to pass through the yard gate, his shoulders brushing the posts. The farmhouse was sturdy but plain, smelling of damp wood and hay. The floors were packed dirt, swept clean but uneven. A few tools, a hammer, a coil of rope, hung on pegs by the door. A rough shelf held jars of preserves and a single cracked mug. No frills, just the bones of a life that kept going. The woman led him to a lean-to that served as a kitchen. She moved with the slow purpose of someone who didn't expect company. "What do I call you?" Torin asked. "Call me Mara," she said, sharp. "I ain't your kin." Torin nodded, unbothered, and set his bundle down. A tattered sack big enough for a man to sleep in, holding a single blanket, a flint, and a whittled figure of a bird, its wings half-finished. Mara gestured to a pot on the stove, crusted with last night's oats. "You good with fixing things?" she asked, scrubbing the pot with a rag older than Milo. "I manage," Torin said. "There's a fence by the sheep pen. Posts are splintered, wires loose. Can you handle it?" Torin was already moving, his shadow swallowing the yard. The sun climbed fast, turning the air thick and heavy. He found the pen, the fence leaning like a drunkard, posts cracked by wind and time. In the barn, he gathered what he needed: a coil of wire, a mallet bigger than most men could lift, and a brush to scrape the rot. His hands worked slow but sure, bending wire like thread, setting posts deep enough to hold against a gale. Finn and Milo watched from the porch steps, Finn's eyes narrow, Milo whispering to his wooden horse. By midday, the fence stood firm, not pretty but solid, the gate swinging smooth. Torin stepped back, brushing dirt from his hands, and caught Mara watching from the barn's edge. She didn't speak, just gave a single nod. "Food's ready," she said, turning toward the house. Inside, a table held 4 bowls, one oversized and dented, set for Torin. Oats, a chunk of hard bread, water from the well. They ate in silence. Milo slipped a crumb to his horse, as if it might nibble. Finn's stare never left Torin. "You got kin?" Finn asked, voice sharp mid-bite. Torin's spoon paused. "None." "Where you from?" Finn pressed. "Does it matter?" Torin replied, his tone even, not defiant. Mara's eyes flicked between them, but she said nothing, just kept eating. The meal ended as quietly as it began, the weight of unspoken questions settling like dust. Mara's spoon clinked against her bowl, sharp in the quiet. "Finn," she said, her voice cutting through the boy's stare. Finn swallowed his oats, eyes still locked on Torin, but he didn't speak again. The meal ended, and Torin gathered the bowls without prompting, his massive hands cradling them like eggs. He washed them in the basin, slow and deliberate, as if each motion was a promise. When he finished, Mara handed him a bucket so big it could have been a barrel. "Fence on the west ridge is sagging," she said. "Go see." Torin nodded, shouldered his sack, and lumbered out. The sun was sinking, painting the hollow in shades of fire. Mara found him an hour later, knee-deep in brambles, sweat streaking his face. He was driving a new post into the earth with one hand, the ground trembling faintly with each strike. His palms were scraped raw, a cut on one finger oozing red, but the fence stood tall, straighter than it had in seasons. "You don't stop easy," Mara said, her voice flat but not unkind. Torin didn't turn. "You've got a lot that needs fixing." Mara didn't argue. She just stood there, watching, her shadow small against his. "You eat tonight," she said finally. "Sleep in the old barn." Torin nodded once. "Thank you." Mara turned back to the house. Torin watched her go, then lifted his eyes to the horizon, where the sun spilled molten light across the peaks. It wasn't home, but it wasn't the open road either. That was enough for now. The barn was a cavernous shell, its beams sagging but sturdy, the hayloft empty save for a few stray bales. Torin ducked inside, his head brushing the rafters, sending dust motes swirling in the lantern's glow. There was no cot big enough for him, so he spread his blanket on the straw-strewn floor, the wood groaning under his weight. A gap in the wall let moonlight sliver through, sharp and silver. He sat, easing off his boots, cracked leather, patched with rope, his feet rough with calluses and fresh blisters. His hands were worse, torn and stinging, the cuts still weeping. He rinsed them with water from the bucket, drying them on his shirt. Pain was familiar, a companion as constant as his shadow. But here, it felt like it might mean something. He lay back, arms behind his head, staring at the splintered rafters. Through the wall's crack, stars gleamed like scattered coins. It had been months since he'd slept under anything but sky. His breath slowed, his body sinking into the straw, the ache in his bones settling. Tomorrow would bring more work. He wanted it. Mara was at the stable when the dawn broke, her silhouette sharp against the mist. Torin joined her, his steps careful to avoid the fence posts he'd fixed. She didn't mention his limp, just handed him a sack of grain bigger than a man. "Sheep pens need feeding," she said. "Watch Milo's ram. It's got a temper and no sense." The sheep bleated their complaints as Torin scattered grain, the ram charging him twice before a gentle nudge from his boot sent it scampering. Milo watched from the fence, his wooden horse tucked under his arm like a sentinel. "You fed him right," he said at last, voice small but sure. Torin dipped his head. "Tried to." "You smell worse than they do," Milo added, then turned and ran off, his boots kicking up dust. Finn was nowhere in sight. By mid-morning, Mara had Torin stringing wire along the south meadow. The old fence was a ruin, posts splintered, wire rusted to flakes. "Pull it too tight, it breaks," Mara said, leaning over him. "Too loose, the sheep wander." Torin nodded, his hands careful despite the sting of blisters, adjusting the wire until it hummed just right. "I get it," he said. Mara's eyes held his for a moment. "I ain't just talking about fences." Lunch was silent again. Finn appeared, a battered journal under his arm, his gaze still wary but less sharp. He didn't speak to Torin, but he didn't leave either. Milo rambled about the ram's new limp, grinning behind his horse. Mara ate like each bite was a decision. When they finished, she stood and nodded toward the stable. "You good with animals?" she asked Torin. Some, he said. Let's see. The mare was restless, a hulking gray beast with a white streak down her face and a habit of pawing the ground like it owed her something. Torin approached slow, letting her sniff his hand, his fingers gentle despite their size. He hefted the saddle, big as a table, onto her back with ease, his movements steady even as his blistered hands protested. He didn't mount, no horse could carry him. Instead, he led her in a slow circle around the pen, once, then twice, his steps matching her rhythm. Mara watched, arms crossed, saying nothing. Mara gave no warnings, just watched, her silence a test to see if Torin would falter. He didn't. When he led the mare back to the stable, his legs ached from crouching to avoid low beams, but his face stayed steady. Mara nodded once. "You'll work with me tomorrow," she said. It was all she offered, but for Torin, it was a door cracked open. That evening, Torin helped Milo gather apples from the orchard. The boy handed him a basket big enough for a man to sit in, watching how Torin's massive hands cradled the fruit, gentle as if they were glass. "My pa used to make apple mash," Milo said, clutching his wooden horse. Torin glanced down. "You mean cider?" "No," Milo said, sharp. "Apple mash." Torin nodded. "Apple mash, then." Milo studied him, then passed another apple as if Torin had earned a point. Dinner came with flatbread and a thin stew with bits of meat, barely enough, but it was there. The boys ate fast, scraping their bowls. Torin ate slowly, savoring the warmth. Mara sipped from a dented mug, staring into the fire like it held secrets she'd stopped trying to solve. "You staying?" Finn asked, his voice slicing the quiet. Torin didn't look up from his bowl. "For now." "That ain't what I asked." Torin set his spoon down, hands steady despite the cracked blisters. "Got nowhere else?" Finn's eyes bored into him, weighing if that was enough. Then he looked away. "Makes two of us," he muttered, so soft only Torin's sharp ears caught it. Later, after the boys were in bed, Mara sat on the porch, honing a scythe. Torin lingered at the steps, unsure if he should stay or go. His head nearly brushed the porch roof. Mara didn't look at him. "Used to have a dozen hands on this farm," she said. "Strong men steady. Now it's me and whoever's desperate enough to stay." Torin stepped closer, the boards groaning under his weight. "You don't seem like someone who asks for help." "I don't," Mara said, testing the side's edge with her thumb. "But I'm learning to take it when it shows up." Torin leaned against a post, careful not to snap it. "You keeping me on?" "You keep working like you do, I'd be a fool not to." Torin gazed across the dark hollow, stars glinting like scattered flint. "You ever get tired of it all?" Mara paused, then answered low. "Every damn day." Torin nodded. "Me too." The next morning, they worked the fields together. Mara on a sturdy draft horse, Torin on foot, his strides matching her pace. The sun was still low, the air sharp with frost. They checked fences, cleared debris from the stream, and shooed a fox from the sheep pen. Mara spoke little, but when she did, her words cut clean. "Land don't care if you're worn out. Don't care if you're broke. It just keeps on. So you do too." Torin didn't argue. When they returned near noon, Finn was on the porch, scribbling in his journal, and Milo was carving lines in the dirt with a stick. Both looked up as Torin ducked through the gate. Milo grinned. Finn didn't, but his eyes softened, just a fraction. That night, the barn felt less hollow. Not home, but not nowhere. Torin pulled out his whittled bird, its wings still unfinished, and worked at it by lantern light, his knife steady despite the sting in his hands. He mended a tear in his blanket with a cord he'd saved, his fingers careful, deliberate. His hands were torn, his back ached, his stomach growled softly. But the hunger that gnawed at his heart was quieter now. He had a roof. He had work. And tomorrow, Mara would call his name, and he'd answer. That was enough. The first time Mara sent Torin out alone, she didn't speak of trust. She just handed him a scrap of cloth with tasks scrawled in charcoal, pointed to the north meadow, and said, "Check the stream. Look for crack posts. Keep the mare from stumbling in badger holes." Torin tucked the cloth into his pocket, nodded, and set off, leading the mare with a rope, his steps shaking the earth. The horse snorted, testing him, but Torin's calm hand steadied her. Finn stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching until Torin's shadow vanished over the ridge. "He'll manage," Mara said behind him. "Didn't say nothing," Finn muttered. "You didn't need to." Out in the meadow, alone with the wind and the creak of the mare's harness, Torin felt a knot in his chest loosen. Not fully, never fully, but enough to breathe deeper. The farm was starting to feel like something he could grip, a place where his name didn't echo back unanswered. But even that scared him. Nothing good ever stayed. Torin had learned that lesson under too many cold skies. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about staying forever. Maybe it was about showing up tomorrow. He worked the meadow slow and steady as Mara had shown him, not rushing, not careless, just right. When he found a splintered post near the dry stream bed, he marked it with a strip of cloth, just as she taught. By the time he looped back toward the stable, the sun was high, his shirt soaked, and the mare's flanks glistened with sweat. The bucket of water he carried was nearly dry. Mara met him at the stable gate, her eyes scanning the mare, then Torin. "Find the stream by the willows?" "Dry," Torin said, his voice low. "Rocks clogging it, I think." Mara grunted. "We'll clear it tomorrow." She handed him a jug of water, big enough for his hands. "Good work." That was all. No smile, no fanfare. But to Torin, the words landed like a cornerstone. Later that evening, Milo sat in the dirt by the porch, weaving grass into a lopsided ring. Finn was wrestling with the well pump, his sleeves rolled, cursing under his breath as the handle stuck. Torin approached, pulling a metal washer the size of a plate from his pocket. "Pump's leaking," he said. "You'll lose half the water if you keep forcing it." Finn stared at the washer, then at Torin. "You think you know everything?" "No," Torin said, kneeling to fit the washer, his shadow swallowing Finn. "Just this." His hands moved sure, threading the piece into place. When the pump groaned back to life, smoother now, Finn crossed his arms. "Where'd you learn that?" "Nowhere special," Torin said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Watched a man fix one once. He didn't see me." Finn didn't reply, but he didn't walk away either. The storm hit 2 nights later, swift and brutal. One moment, the sky was a soft wash of dusk. The next, it churned black and purple. Mara stood at the porch rail, eyes on the horizon like she could taste the trouble coming. "Get the tools inside," she said. "Tie the shutters. Bring the sheep in if they'll come." Torin didn't hesitate. He ran, his strides shaking the ground. The wind roared first, fierce and biting, bending the trees and rattling loose boards on the stable. Thunder followed, deep and angry, rolling through the hollow like a warning. Then the rain came, cold and heavy, pounding the roof and turning the yard to mud. Torin hauled the last bale of hay inside as lightning cracked the sky. Finn slammed the door behind him. "You're soaked," Finn said. "Rain asked you first?" He shoved a blanket at Torin, his hands unsteady. Mara moved through the house like she'd weathered 100 storms, checking shutters, setting buckets under leaks, ensuring the lanterns were full. Milo curled in the corner, clutching his wooden horse, eyes wide as saucers. When the lanterns flickered, Torin knelt, his bulk filling half the room, and rested a hand near Milo's. "We're fine," he said. "It's just noise." "You sure?" "No," Torin admitted. "But I'm here anyway." That seemed to settle Milo. The next morning, the field steamed under a clearing sun, the air thick with wet earth. Mud clung to everything. The lower meadow was a swamp, and one of the sheep pen gates had been torn clean off. "Roof's leaking worse," Mara muttered, inspecting the attic with Torin. "We'll need to patch it before it caves." Torin peered at the beams, stained dark and sagging. "We got enough tarp?" Mara shook her head. "Enough pitch, not enough wood." "You could strip the old shed," Torin said. "Back walls not holding weight." Mara looked at him. "You sure?" "No," Torin said, brushing hair from his eyes. "But I'll do it anyway." Mara nodded. "That'll do." That afternoon, while Milo napped and Finn read by the window, Torin worked on the roof, shirt off, hammer in hand, sweat rolling down his broad back. His size made the work fast. He could reach the ridgepole without a ladder, but he moved carefully, every swing measured. Mara passed him patches of tarp, and they worked mostly in silence, except when she barked a warning or Torin muttered at a slipped nail. "You always work like you're proving something?" Mara asked at last. Torin paused, hammer mid-swing. "Ain't I?" Mara nodded slowly. "Me too." By the week's end, something had shifted. No grand moment, no promises, just the small ways a place weaves itself around you. Milo started calling Torin by name instead of "big fella." Finn lent him a journal, its pages half filled with sketches. Mara gave him a key to the stable, heavy and rusted but his. The kind of trust that didn't need words. Trust like that didn't come cheap, but when it settled, Torin felt it like a weight he could carry. That night after supper, Mara poured a tin mug of coffee and handed Torin one big enough for his hands, no words needed. They sat on the porch in the quiet dusk, watching the sun bleed into the hills. "This farm," Mara said, voice low, "it ain't about the dirt." "Not really." Torin sipped slowly, the mug warm against his palms. "What's it about?" "Keeping things whole when the world wants to break them." She didn't look at him, but she didn't need to. "You holding together, big man?" Torin paused. "I think so." Mara nodded once. That was enough. From inside, Milo's laugh rang out, followed by Finn's sharp retort, like a warning with no teeth. The wind was gentle, the hollow still for once. And Torin, he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, crumpled and stained, tucked in the pack of a trader who rode through fast, eyes darting like he'd seen ghosts in the hills. Mara slid it open at the kitchen table with a knife worn thin from years of cutting twine and bone. Torin sat nearby, oiling a massive hinge for the stable gate. Finn and Milo were outside, pinning damp clothes to the line as the breeze tugged at them. Mara read the letter once, then again, folding it slow, like it might crack. "Trouble?" Torin asked. "Maybe." She set the letter down, her fingers tapping once, twice, weighing something heavy. Then she slid it across the table. Torin read it, his eyes narrowing. Short, sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "We haven't forgotten the stand you made. If you think that scrap of land holds without the Iron Veil Collective's blessing, check your roots. No signature, just a stamped mark. I see." "They coming?" Torin asked, voice steady. Mara's jaw tightened. "Feels like it." Torin stood, wiping his hands on a rag big enough to be a blanket. "Then we don't wait." They spent that night shoring up the fences, not because posts could stop what was coming, but because work drowned out the fears no one spoke. Finn stayed up, hauling wire and stacking tools, pretending his hands weren't shaking. Milo made bread rolls, setting them down with small, fierce grunts, like he was feeding a battalion. They'd become a unit, not in words but in motion, the way a hammer was passed before it was needed, the way they stood side by side, sweat and silence binding them. By midnight, the lanterns flickered low, their shadows stretching across the porch. "They'll come at night," Mara said, her voice like gravel. Torin nodded. "Cowards usually do." "You scared?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm not leaving." "That's what counts." Mara looked at him then, really looked, not as a hand, not as a giant, but as something more. Something solid. "You could. Still time to walk." Torin shook his head. "I ran once. Won't again." Mara looked away. "Yeah. Me too." The first torch came 2 nights later, flung past the stable, where the dry grass caught like kindling. A second hit near the sheep pen, flames licking hungry and fast. Then came the horses, 4 riders, cloaked and masked, leaning low, hands clutching fire. Torin didn't wait. He was off the porch before Mara could shout, a bucket the size of a barrel in one hand, a tarp in the other. He smothered the first flame with a swing that shook the ground, the air hissing. Mara followed, rifle in hand, barking orders Torin already knew. Finn hauled water from the well, his face pale but set. Milo held the pen gate open, hands trembling as the sheep bolted inside. The riders veered toward the house. One fired a pistol skyward, the crack splitting the night. Another lit a torch and charged the stable. Mara raised her rifle and fired. The rider jerked, tumbling from his horse into the mud. The others faltered, one dropping his torch in the dirt. The fourth, seeing the stable glow orange, wheeled and fled, hooves pounding like a storm on stone. Torin reached the stable in 3 strides, kicking the door wide. Smoke billowed, thick and choking. "Clear the straw," he roared, not waiting for an answer. He plunged inside, his bulk filling the doorway. Mara cursed and followed. By the time the last flame was out, the stable was scorched but standing, the air heavy with soot and sweat. Torin's hands were singed, his shirt torn, but he stood tall, chest heaving. Mara looked at him, rifle still in hand, and nodded once. "You held," she said. Torin wiped ash from his face. "So did you." The stable was scorched, half blackened but standing. Torin emerged, coughing, soot streaking his massive arms, eyes red but sharp. Mara limped behind, her sleeve singed at the shoulder. Finn helped them to the porch, where Milo draped a blanket, big as a sail, over Torin's back. "Did we win?" Milo asked, voice small. "No," Mara said. "We held." Torin coughed, spitting ash into the dirt. "Sometimes that's the same thing." The next morning, the sun rose bright and careless, as if it hadn't seen the night's chaos. The farmstead bore scars, black streaks on the stable, shattered boards, smoke curling from smoldering straw. But the fences stood, the gates swung true, and the porch lantern flickered in the breeze. By midday, riders arrived, not Ironvale Collective, but folks from Low Crossing. Tilda Marrow, Amos Reed, old Widow Cress with her mule limping behind her. One by one, they came, some with hammers, some with coils of rope, some just to stand and bear witness. They didn't ask what happened. They knew. Mara stood at the gate, face hard as stone. "We're not asking for help," she said. Amos dismounted, his boots crunching. "Good," he said. "We're not offering. We're here to build." They patched the stable. Finn whitewashed the shutters. Milo herded the sheep back to their pen, strutting like a commander. Torin worked beside Mara, hauling beams no man could lift, resetting stones with hands that could crush rock. They didn't speak for hours, but near dusk, as they rested under the old oak, Mara handed Torin a jug of coffee, its handle bent to fit his grip. "Never had a son," she said, voice rough as gravel. Torin took the jug, sipping slow. "Never had a mother worth remembering." They sat in silence a while longer. Then Mara said, "Reckon we change that now." Torin didn't speak. He reached out and they clasped hands, her small one swallowed in his, firm like kin. Weeks passed. The fire scars faded. The fences held. The meadows greened again. Torin grew into the farm like a mountain finding its place. He fixed things unasked, mended gates before dawn. Milo trailed him like a shadow, chattering to his wooden horse. Finn sketched in his journal, sometimes reading aloud, not to teach Torin but because he didn't want to sit alone. One evening at supper, for bowls set, Mara cleared her throat. All eyes turned to her. She nodded toward the sign out front, where Hollowstead Farm was carved into weathered wood. "That name's worn out," she said. No one breathed. Mara looked at Torin. "You think Marrowfield's too long for a sign?" Torin's mouth opened, but no sound came. Finn grinned. Milo clapped, his horse bouncing. "No," Torin said, voice low. "Sounds just right." That night, under the stars, they sat on the porch again. The air was still, but not empty. Hope hummed in it like a warm wind. Mara leaned back in her chair. Finn sprawled in his journal open. Milo curled against Torin's arm, his wooden horse tucked under his chin. Torin looked out at the hollow. He'd come with nothing but a name and a whittled bird. Now he had a barn, a place at the table, and people who stood with him when fire came. Not a perfect life, but one worth staying for.